Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work at NBC Sharks and on Twitter at Sheng_Peng.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find me on Twitter at halfwall_hockey, at my website, half-wallhockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. This week, Sheng, what do we got?
We have a very exciting guest this week, or actually maybe exciting is not the right word, guest to commiserate with. Craig Morgan with PHNX Sports. He's been covering the Coyotes since 2000, and he's a man that knows all about rough starts to a season. In 2017-18 and 21-22, the Coyotes both started the season 0-10-1, just like your Sharks. And so we asked Craig how he got through the season personally, and more importantly to you guys, what can Sharks fans look forward to in these very, very hard, not hard to play against, but hard to get through years?
Yeah, it was a fun interview. Craig had lots of interesting insights about those seasons, and a lot of it felt very echoey of what the Sharks are going through currently. So it was fascinating to listen to him talk.
I like that word,
and
echoey.
Echoing. Echoey. So this week, before we get to Craig, we got a couple of things. I'm happy. That's the first proclamation of this week is I'm happy. And anytime the Sharks are going to make me happy in a week, A, it's going to be rare. And then B, I'm going to wear a jersey of the Sharks. So that's my new proclamation for this podcast is anytime I'm happy, you'll see me in a Sharks jersey.
I'm not going to wear a jersey because all my jerseys are Kings jerseys.
Anytime
I have a USA.
I
have a USA jersey.
True. I'm trying to think of something with the Kings that we could do for you to get into a Kings jersey, but yeah, we'll figure it out later. Anyway, so why the Sharks? What we're going to cover this week? Why they made me happy this week? 2 wins after a season of losing so far. Grier addressed the team before those 2 wins. We're talking about that a little bit, and then a Kalyn Addison trade to kind of cap off the week as well. We'll briefly mention the loss to Vegas as well.
And we should remind everybody that this podcast will come out after the Anaheim game, but we're recording before the Anaheim game. So if William Eklund drops a hat trick, we might record an emergency add-on to the episode. But for now, let's assume that just like the most of the season, odds are the Sharks get their butts kicked. Odds are, and so right now we're going to be talking about up to before the Anaheim game, so the 2 wins this week, and briefly the butt kicking in Vegas.
Yeah, so let's get to the 2 wins. So the Sharks win by 1-goal games to the Edmonton Oilers 3-2, and then before that to the Philadelphia Flyers 2-1, which again, first 2 wins of the season. Felt great, and also Mackenzie Blackwood was kind of the hero in both games. It felt like getting outshot heavily both times. Sheng, what was your thoughts about these 2 games? Anything stick out to you?
Mackenzie Blackwood is him.
He is him.
We'll see, of course, still early in the season, but it is great to see goaltender win games for the Sharks. We haven't seen that too much over the last last 5 years. So maybe that is there for Mackenzie. Again, when the Sharks traded for him, a lot of talk was about his talent, how Calder, he was, I think, 6th in the Calder voting, 2020, maybe it was at a point tabbed to be sort of Team Canada's starter for the 2022 Olympics before COVID and all that stuff. But he was, a lot of people were projecting him in that spot. And so it's nice to kind of see him start to live up to that potential. Hopefully he doesn't get shell shocked behind this team defense. But a couple other impressions from these wins, and we actually even saw this in the Vegas game. William Eklund has looked great next to Tongue-lashing, and I think that is sort of to be expected in some ways, because Hertl, for all you want to complain about, the Sharks should have traded him, and the Sharks probably should have traded him a couple of years ago. He is a guy that, again, has a history, even if he's not the most dynamic, fastest player. He's not Connor McDavid, but he's still good enough to make his line mates better.
Mhm.
And there's really no one else on the Sharks that you can say that about, I think, at this point, with
Yeah.
Eric gone and Timo Meyer gone and leaving Logan Couture out, right? So right now, Thomas Hertl is the only guy I would say on the Sharks that legitimately is making his line mates better and has a history of it. And he, I think, is helping with that with Eklund. We're going to dig into that a little bit more, but I don't think it's any coincidence that Eklund looks like he's taking another step next to Hertl, and that's great to see. Of course, the problem is that leaves one line working for the Sharks, and that appears to be the case the last 3 games, even in the wins.
Yep.
So we're hoping that Granlund can find his game, and we've seen flashes here and there. Was of course not very good against Vegas, but we see flashes of it, and so hopefully he can find it because the Sharks definitely need it because there is no real timeline for Couture's return.
Yeah. I enjoy that now. It was for like the first 2 weeks of the season. The fourth line was probably the best line for the Sharks, and now
Never
it's
a good
like
sign.
never a good thing. Now it's like our first line is our best line, which
Right.
improvements. Not that they're world beaters or gonna match up amazingly against every other team's top line, but seeing the cohesion of Eklund, Zetterlund, and Hurdle, it works. The line works. Eklund's really good at entering the zone. Zetterlund's obviously a good finisher. He also can retrieve pucks on the wall. Hurdle's kind of like that glue guy in the middle that just kind of controls the ice and is defensively responsible. And he as well can he's just so versatile. So he can be a shooting option, passing option. He's just it works as a line together, and I think that's a good thing. And I'm pretty sure they're going to hang on to it until it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Probably. I think another guy that stood out in the games was Duclair. I think Duclair had a good game,
Sure.
a couple good games there, and he's kind of like the guy that on that second line is going to have to continue to produce, even though he's been out with an illness this past couple of games, or he's going to be out tonight. He was out on Friday.
Yeah, yeah. It's on
So
Granlund too, though, because I think
and
Granlund's
Granlund.
got more on him, and I know that it hasn't looked great so far. But
Hmm.
past again, we're going on past track record. Granlund should be in there.
Yeah.
His best years aren't as far away as say Mike Hoffman's, who again, yeah, it's not. Yeah,
Not look.
not in a conversation right now. Yeah,
He's
unfortunately.
not looking great. That,
Nope.
and I don't think that Granlund's looked particularly bad either. Sometimes he does.
Yeah, but he's been
Uh,
good too. I mean,
he
for
has.
every bad play that you mentioned, granted, like yesterday, like against Vegas, and
Hmm.
the turnover that made it 5-0, he made good
Yep.
plays against Vegas too. But he made that great pass to Kunin that Kunin wasn't able to finish. But once again, though, yeah, there's got to be, of course, more of the good than the bad. It can't be a 1-for-1 thing.
Yeah. Kunin is our modern day Noah Gregor, so it's just not basically the same. It feels like maybe a little bit more hitty than Noah Gregor was, but
Way more hitty, better on the
yeah.
kills, so he's got value, but
Mhm.
definitely though, yeah, looking at the line,
The
yeah,
finishing.
yeah, that one goal in 14 games, you probably want that to be more with the number of games he's played. And I'm just looking at, I mean, I try to avert my eyes from sort of the Sharks their stats this year because they're so ugly in some ways. And holy shit, Mara Farrell is a minus 18 and Philip
Yeah.
Zadina has a minus 16. Those are the worst
Oof.
among their positions. And I don't think Mara Farrell has been minus 18 bad this year. Uh I don't
So
think
that's
so.
what I was thinking. I was looking at his minus. I think he was minus like 30, 33 last year, and I was like, he's
Yeah.
gonna break 40 this year, probably in minus.
Oh, I
Like
mean, he might
eh,
break. I mean,
he break
at this
50.
pace, he's making minus 100
uh,
at this rate.
yeah, I don't know. Um, but that is actually kind of shocking because I don't think Zadina's out there all the time. So like Ferrara's out there on every single,
Right,
every
which
single goal
it kind of makes
against
some sense, and then Ferrell's
Zadina.
matched up against top lines.
Kind of scared
Uh
about that.
Zadina
Yeah,
again. We've talked about it extensively, so I don't want to
yeah,
dig back on it. But and he did score the game winner
yeah.
against Edmonton. So yeah, good on him. Hopefully that kind of lifts a weight off his shoulders. But I think all the tools are there. But again, the just he needs to, if he's not scoring, he needs to be happy to play that B game and happy to do that and fully focused on that. And when he does that, then the A game and the offense will come. I
Sure.
think again, Eklund is a great example of this. Even though Eklund's a couple of years younger, of a guy that if the offense isn't there, you still see him doing the B game. There's doesn't seem to be any kind of issue with that.
Yep.
Uh, doing his best to cover the right man, that sort of thing. Zadina's all over the place still, and so hopefully, again, the talent is there though. I do fully think that about Zadina, and
Hmm.
so hopefully that turns around.
Yeah. So besides or what kind of like preceded the wins was a Mike Grier tongue lashing, probably. We don't
Yep.
actually know the details of what was said in
Oh,
the locker room,
can we
but
pour one out though for the before we get to Mike Greer for the
sure.
Jacob McDonald hype train?
Oh, the
Right
Jacob
after
McDonald.
right after 2 points, after a 2 point game, where he looked like the most valid one of the few Sharks players that showed up in a Pittsburgh game, and he's felt with the exact same injury. So I feel bad for him because he was ready. I mean, I think that the Sharks were about to make. We'll mention the Kalyn Addison trade in a little bit, but I
Yep.
think the Sharks were about to make that trade. But still, McDonald was probably in line to be at least the PP2 quarterback after that game,
Yeah.
and boom. So Jacob McDonald, all-star hype, point per game player right now.
Point per
So.
game, Jacob McDonald hype train. No, it'll be fine. He's
But
he's done.
yeah,
He'll come back. No.
let's
He's
get
on
this
IR.
train. Let's get this train back on the track. So you mentioned the
Sure.
Mike Greer thing. We do know actually some of what he said. You can actually
Sure.
we can actually see the entire interview that we had with Mike. It was behind closed doors,
Yep.
in the Sharks conference room, 45 minutes. I put the whole thing on San Jose Hockey Now, so behind the paywall, of course. So give you a reason to subscribe. But a couple of things that Mike did say that he did mention in that meeting is the first one about, or one of the big things he mentioned that was interesting, was that Mike himself played on a team that, at least in record, was not dissimilar to the Sharks 2003-04 Capitals. Of
Mhm.
course, that Capitals team was supposed to be good. They had Yager, they had made it to the playoffs the year before, but they just started off slow and just kind of snowballed. And of course, at the end, that's the pick that ended up being the pick that draft that got Ovechkin. So all worked out wonderfully for the Caps. But anyway, though, before that point, though, during that season, though, they get off to a slow start. Bruce Cassidy, I think, was fired, and Mike was talking about a certain point where he just was feeling sorry for himself. Like, just
Mhm.
he was 28, the prime of his career still. He had been on pretty good teams with the Capitals. The Oilers were playoff teams at least, and he just was sort of looking like a dead end place for him, just a place to kind of play out the string. And the new coach there, Glenn Hanlon, told Mike, um, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself.
Mhm.
No one's gonna feel bad for you right now. You're just easy pickings, kind of. And also, control what you can control out there. Just what can you control? Show up for practice, have a smile in games, play your hardest. That's all you can control, right?" And Mike mentioned that him and Jeff Halpern, in particular, that year, kind of took that message in stride, and they were able to kind of finish the season just on a high note with their careers, at least.
Mhm.
Actually, Mike got traded to Buffalo that year. He worked
Hmm.
his way out of a bad situation in Washington, and that was Buffalo. That was the Sabres around the time that they were making the Eastern Conference
Yeah.
Finals. So those are the Ryan Miller. We talked to Ryan Miller, of course, a couple weeks ago. So the Ryan Miller years
Yeah.
with the Sabres, and so he did say that he told that to the guys, that no one is feeling sorry for you. Like you want to be in a better situation, be it with the Sharks or in
Yep.
a different organization. You've got to pick yourself up, because by the trade, I mean, he didn't say this, but if by the trade deadline, let's talk about before the Mike Grier meeting. By the trade deadline, if you're Anthony Duclair and you have 9 goals or something like that at the trade deadline, if you're Mike Hoffman, you have 2 goals. You have Kevin LeBanc, you have. And right now, Kevin LeBanc has 2 assists in 10 games, so you prorate that. If you're Mikael Grant, I mean, just down the line, right? No one's
Yep.
gonna want you. You're gonna be you're gonna be stuck in San Jose. So
Mhm.
if you want out, then you've got to show a way better form.
And not
And
even just
even if
like
you want
for this
out,
season, for
right?
next year,
Next
like they're
season too,
UFAs. They got to
right?
get signed. So like
Right.
their last, four in the NHL is them doing nothing. So no team is going to want them beyond like a PTO or something.
You want out or you want to stay in San Jose, it's still the same. Pick yourself up.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you got 70 games, and if you're gonna dog it for 70 games, no one will want you. You'll be lucky to get a PTO if you dog it for the next
Mhm.
70 games. And so that was part of the message. Also, too, he mentioned this to us that I asked him, like, what are the things that you're judging David Quinn and the coaching staff for the rest of the season? Because look, obviously the Sharks, even at the beginning of the season, was a lot of people said this. The Sharks were not designed to make the playoffs. We all know this, right? But the Sharks
Mhm.
also weren't designed, and we mentioned this too, to be the 1974-75 Capitals. That's a 21 point
Yeah.
team, I think. Goal differential of -265. It's just unacceptable, just how they were losing, right? And so he says the three things that he's looking for from the Sharks. I think these are three things to talk about by the end of the season to see if David and his coaching staff can get this team back on these tracks at least. And it's not a high bar, but it's just the reality of the situation. So the three things: push back, compete. Which
Yeah.
we did see in the Philadelphia and Edmonton wins, even if the shot counter was lopsided. But also too structure. The team just kind of adhering to what the coaches want defensively and not bleeding sort of the ugly chances that they were bleeding against Pittsburgh and Vancouver. And I would say even against Vegas in that 5-0 loss, they managed to do that, to not humiliate and embarrass themselves at least. And
Yeah.
again, it's a low bar, but that is where we're at. And so if David Quinn can get this group of sort of, I use this word actually in that chat with Mike. It's not the nicest word, but it's sort of the reality of this team of Sharks is a weird blend of some holdover veterans like Hurdle, Couture, and Vlasic, a lot of young players, obviously like Eklund and Zetterlund and Zadina, and a lot of kind of mercenaries, guys that are here.
Sure.
We don't know how long they'll be here. Duclair and Granlund and Ruda, and even guys that are going to be UFAs like Barabanov, right? They, if you're being honest with yourself, they're looking ahead, of course. Like, what's going to happen? Am I going to stay here?
Mhm.
Do I want to keep losing but make my money and put up points, or do I want to try to go somewhere and win? So all that, right? LeBanc obviously is another guy in that sort of grouping too. So it's a very weird mix of players, and obviously everything that could have happened except for the goaltending happened, blew up in the first 11 games of the season.
Yeah.
And so we'll see if Quinn can get everybody at least pulling at the same rope. And n- they're gonna get shit kicked a few times for the rest of the season. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But it can't happen like it did, where it was 2 games in a row, and you're setting all kinds of marks, historical marks. The first time since 1965 that team has given up 10 or more goals in back-to-back games. I mean, look, teams got through the whole 80s. Wayne Gretzky put up 215 points, and no
And
one,
that
no
didn't
one did
happen.
that in that era.
Yeah. Yep.
So
No.
anyway, so that's going to be the sort of the barometer. Three things that I think Mike is going to look at, and if Quinn can get there, then he's done actually a pretty good coaching job. This is a weird mix of players.
Yeah. And to be honest, this is kind of what I wanted from Greer. After what happened, I wanted some
Mhm.
accountability, and
Yeah,
it seemed like I didn't want this to just be like swept under the rug and just being like, okay, well, like we'll move on, maybe we'll address it a little bit. I wanted like to Greer to do what he did, which is find some accountability or take some accountability
right.
for this and try and move forward. And he
It's
also
not
mentioned
okay. It's
like,
not
yeah,
acceptable, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
This is not right.
yeah.
Like there's tanking and then there's like this, which is like
Yeah. What
way
is this
different.
anyway?
Yeah. So I like the accountability. That made me happy. And beyond that, I also liked that he was mentioning that there were some things going on that he said wouldn't fly in the locker room, and, and
Mm,
and basically some guys like feeling sorry for themselves, or who knows what the things were that they were doing, but
right.
things that he didn't find acceptable. So good for Greer. I think that was a very good general manager move for him.
It
It's
was.
also probably, I mean, it's the first time he's had to do something like that too.
Yep.
So that's
I
interesting.
asked him. I was curious about that, and he said he didn't do it last year, not in this kind of team meeting kind of form. He said that, and I think Logan Couture told Quinn this too, that Doug used to do it about once or twice a year, and I think those are kind of famous, actually. A couple of those meetings. famously, Doug did it the last time the Sharks had a good team. I think Doug did it after early season Ottawa lost when they were in Ottawa, or maybe it was Montreal, and got the Sharks going from, not saying it was directly all Doug, but got the Sharks going from that point of the season, early November, because the first Carlson year they struggled. I just want to add a one point because I may not be able to make this joke later on, but I made this joke before the wins, that it's good to see that the Sharks didn't let the Oilers win, didn't let the Flyers win. I mean, Jay Woodcroft just got fired, even though the Oilers beat Seattle, because I was about ready to start writing stories calling the tank the Shark Tank, not the tank of the losing, but the tank, the arena, the tonic,
The
because
tonic,
the tonic, yeah.
like you have to explain it.
Oh, that joke didn't hit. How good thing I
No,
didn't get to
you
use it.
mean
It
like
took too much
poison?
to explain. No, the tonic, as in for struggling teams, that this is the tonic for
Oh,
them. Yeah, instead of the
okay,
tank, it's
okay,
the
all
tonic.
right,
So
all right.
ah,
You know what? I
all
don't.
those years of creative writing background came to this, and you didn't get it. Huh.
I think if you had like if you wrote it out, I think it would do a little bit better
Yeah,
than our audio.
TONICTANK. Yeah,
Perfect. You know what, Chang? I approve.
yeah.
But no, it's no longer the tonic for other teams. This is a
Hopefully
dangerous
not.
place to play.
Well, I don't
No,
know. I wouldn't go that far, but
yeah, I know. Um, but so then after the two wins, we did get, like we've mentioned briefly, a 5-0 loss against Vegas, but it did feel like for portions of that game they were more competitive and more towards the winning hockey than they were before. And I think Eklund has continued his good play, even though he didn't put up a point or anything like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
despite points in back-to-back games. So, Vegas is a good team. Vegas beat Colorado 7-0 earlier this year, and they're on top of the NHL right now. So
And it was the
five
second of a
nothing.
back-to-back too. So I think
Yeah.
there are some things that I'm not. Those are games that are going to happen.
Yep.
That game only becomes a problem if Kakinen gets run again and no one does anything, or
Yeah.
we saw Zetterlund get run right and no one does anything. But
Yep.
his buddy, he and Eklund are definitely fast friends in the room,
Hmm.
and so Eklund was right in there. You love to see that, and so you just want the team to be engaged really for the whole game. At this, that's kind of what all you're asking, that everybody's engaged, everybody's pulling on the same rope, and
Yep.
that they're not disengaged like they were after Kakinen got hit. Because regardless of what Grier, that's something else that Grier talked about. He didn't think too much of that, but and I do believe that the Sharks didn't see it and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
That even though the optics were really bad on Kakinen getting hit by Kuzmenko, that only
Yep.
Canucks were around, that the optics were really bad. But I believe that Sharks didn't really see it, and also too, the play itself was a hockey play. Like, he was trying to score and then he hits him by accident. Like, there's no reason to jump Kuzmenko for that. Kuzmenko was just doing his job, which is scoring goals. A little is a bit different than Forsberg trying to score a goal, but leaping on on
Yeah.
on a flat on the ground blockwood. So those are kind of different scenarios there, but
Yeah.
but um definitely, though, it still speaks to a team that was kind of disengaged. They make the joke, the controller off joke about defense, right? The controller was off not only defensively, but just sort of with mental engagement, that no one was really looking when that happened to Kakinen.
Hmm.
And so, or even if someone kind of saw for a second, it was like, he's fine, and it skates off.
Yeah.
you
Like
know,
he'll be great.
yeah, he'll be fine. So that
Hmm.
kind of that's what you do not, that's part of what's not acceptable. And so we didn't quite see that in the Vegas game. So expect more losses like this, where a good team just
Sure.
simply churns the Sharks, grinds the Sharks down. But as long as the Sharks are paying attention,
Hmm.
then that's sort of the bar. Paying attention for all 60 minutes. That's sort of the bar, and
Paying
that's
attention.
we're in a rebuild. So this is the part where I will say that
Hmm.
this team wasn't not a lot was expected of this team,
Yeah.
and so there is a standard. It's not high, and we talk about what that standard is, but yeah, part of the standard is being engaged for 60 minutes at a time, no matter the
Yeah.
score. So
And to be honest, it was kind of the perfect week, and that's the reason why I'm wearing this jersey, because beat the Oilers, which is hilarious. They got out of the slump by beating the Flyers. Not that I have anything against the Flyers. They Grier addressed the accountability, and then they lost to the team they should have lost to, which helps the tank.
They still
So
have the worst record. Yeah.
exactly, they have the worst record now. They're not tied with with Edmonton anymore. Edmonton won last night as well. So it was a perfect week, and then they capped it off by a trade for a offensive defenseman, which was actually one of our subscriber mailbag questions: was who's a young offensive defenseman that's available? Turns out the answer was Kalyn Addison. We just didn't see it. And here it is. The Sharks traded for Kalyn Addison. They traded a 5th round pick in 2026, just 3 drafts away, and Adam Raska, basically for an AHL contract kind of swap thing. So I like the idea, and I like what Grier is doing about the defense. I still have some reservations about how good Kalyn Addison can really be on this team, but I think it was the right idea and the right move for the time with how badly the Sharks were struggling, and the McDonald hype train was down. So
that was clearly the main reason why the trade was made. Oh,
yeah, we lost our number one defenseman.
McDonald train is down. Yeah,
we lost our number one D man.
Our 12-minute /forward/defenseman.
Our number one offensive D-man. Anyway.
So I think I want to close with one last thought about tank. What I was trying to think, I've been thinking about it the last 10 minutes. Tanking is okay, but embarrassing is not, humiliating is not. So
sure.
I think that's the line that fans have to remember. But anyway, on to the Addison trade. I think that, of course, it looks like a big bargain for the Sharks. I mean, a guy who scored 38 points in 92 games in the NHL with the Wild before the trade, but you have to think about why a guy that's 23 and that productive is that cheap. And it's because, you guessed it, the defense is not very good. And we've seen that in the last couple of games. And so it's going to be a work in progress with Kalyn, but definitely the puck moving is there though too. I mean, just we were talking about the Vegas game, we saw kind of the best and worst of him, where he was making subtle passes, long passes, tape to tape, every pass, which you've seen very rarely with the Sharks this year from their defensemen. But of course, we had that shorthanded a goal that was given up, and that was Addison trying to kill the play. Eichel along the wall, and Eichel just rumbled through him like a gnat, and then Eichel hits William Karlsson for the easy goal. So we saw kind of the best and worst. It's going to be a work in progress, but anyway, though, the main takeaway from it, though, is that that for me at least is. Oh, and actually, before I get to that main takeaway, one more thought about sort of how this is the right move. It's also the right price, though, because I think it's clear that Grier didn't want to overinvest in. We talked about Nils Lundkvist, I think, the last podcast, right? And he went for it first, and that's too rich a price. And the second might be too rich a price. Maybe people mentioned Boqvist, right? Boqvist, of course, was a lottery pick years ago, and so I'm not sure if Columbus is going to trade him for a 5th round pick. They might trade him for a 2nd round pick, but if you're the Sharks, you may not want to give something that rich for a guy that you're not so sure about, and you don't know if he's going to be part of the actual core of the team. But a guy like Addison, clear talent, clear flaws, young, great. It's a great gamble. There's no doubt about it. It's exactly what the Sharks need. My main takeaway from all this is look at the draft where Kalyn Addison was drafted. It was the 2018 draft, and who did the Sharks draft at 21 in 2018 draft? It was Ryan Merkley, and so I can't help but think in all this that just how much kind of Ryan Merkley sort of fumbled the bag there in terms of. Honestly, I mean, he was supposed to be the Sharks' power play quarterback of the future. There was every reason for him to be the Sharks' PP2 last year after Karlsson, and that's how poor he was. That he couldn't do that. He didn't even go. He didn't even make final cuts. He didn't make it to the final roster cut down, or even to the final week of it, really. And then, of course, even this year too. If you look at how desperately the Sharks needed somebody who can move the puck, and just how unfortunate that pick was. I mean, obviously, we still understand why the Sharks made it and how much talent puck moving talent that Merkley has. But obviously Merkley just couldn't fill out the other parts of his game, and the puck moving wasn't enough. It just was, spectacular pass here and there mixed in with a head scratching turnover.
Yeah.
And so anyway, you have a Kalyn Addison who went 53rd in that draft, coming in essentially really taking Ryan Merkley's spot,
Yeah.
what should have been Ryan Merkley's spot. And so anyway, I just can't help but think about that, because just think about just how big a hole the Sharks had at PP2 last year that Matt Benning
Sure.
was playing it, and how big a hole the Sharks had on PP1 this year that Kyle Burrows and Mikhail Granlund and Mike Hoffman were playing it. And
Yeah.
that should have been Ryan Merkley in both years. And again, that's not that. I mean, the Sharks made a bad pick, but that's ultimately just on Merkley and bad circumstances. He just didn't
And its
develop.
development. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of just goes to show the difference between like passable defense and
Right.
like not acceptable defense. Cause like the things like if Merkley was on this team right now, the Sharks would be losing 10-2 every single game, no matter what.
I don't know about
And
that, but
well, I'm not like that bad, but
but
like things that he wouldn't even be able to stay long enough to be on power play 2 because they'd bench him just for the horrific things that would happen to the defensive
yeah.
zone. Yeah. And that's the truth. And Kalyn Addison, I think so far what I've watched of him, he has his physicality is very poor.
Mm,
Like he's really bad on the boards. He got trucked by Eichel, all that kind of stuff.
Eichel, yeah.
But he doesn't have the physical edge that he really needs to be a higher than probably a third pairing defenseman with power play minutes. But he is passable defensively, whereas like Merkley also didn't have a good physical frame or effort, but he was so out of position almost always. He had no idea how to defend on 2-on-1s. He just like never developed that area of his game to the point where Addison is at least passable right now, even if he is
I
bad
don't know
in
if he's
general.
passable, but I think it's more a difference between bad
Forgivable, maybe
and
is the right word.
awful. Yeah, forgivable
Forgivable.
maybe. Yeah,
There's the right
we
word.
always
Yeah,
talk about the balance
unforgivable.
of good plays versus
Yeah.
bad plays. And Addison,
Mhm.
I think you're hoping that there's reason to hope that there'll be more good and bad from
Exactly.
Kalyn Addison.
And he does
What?
have the
Yeah.
ability to skate the puck out of the zone, which is like something that the Sharks defense is not very good at.
Right, and Merkley's feet never quite
Yeah,
developed in anywhere close to his vision and his
sure.
actual passing, which is incredible. His passing itself was
Incredible.
was
Yeah,
incredible, but just the other stuff didn't get even close, didn't get passable
yeah.
next to that
Did
skill.
you happen to know that Merkley is second in the KHL in points by a
Yes,
defenseman right now?
yes, I did. Well, yeah, great.
So
Mike
there
Hoffman
we
can
are.
join him there next year. So.
Exactly. Anyway, we're just piling, more dirt on the grave of Ryan
I
Merkley's
just couldn't
NHL
help but
career.
think of it though. Yeah, you're right. We are kind of piling on dirt, and it's
Mhm.
a little, Ryan Merkley's long gone from the Sharks, and so it kind of is a little bit of a low blow to keep doing it.
Sure.
But again, though, couldn't help but notice the draft here for Addison, same age, and really the exact same role.
Yeah.
And if Merkley was even up to that level, he'd still be here. Up to the
Yeah.
Addison level of not very good defense, but does enough offensively and tries enough defensively that, well, he can be played most of the time by a playoff team like the Wild, that they'll take it, they'll deal with it. And so yeah, it just sort of just the echoes of that draft pick just are here with
Yep.
Addison, and of course the Sharks' inability to find a sort of a higher end PP2 quarterback last year and a higher end PP1 quarterback this year.
Mhm. Yeah, the Sharks. Two things about the drafting. Number one, let's pour one out for Adam Raska for leaving the Sharks. He was a seventh round pick in 2020, so not a lot was ever really expected of Raska,
He
but he
was the
was
first
fun.
from that draft to debut in the NHL, and he
He
was fun,
was.
but I think
He
he
was fun.
plateaued too.
Hmm.
He looked like a guy, just sort of his style, his speed, his size, and his attitude, great attitude, was going to be a fixture on your fourth line. But you still have to be better with your puck play. You still have to be better
Hmm.
with just knowing what you have to do defensively, and those things seem to sort of plateau.
Yeah. And then beyond that, it just is crazy to me that the Sharks have no players on the Sharks or Barracuda roster from 2015, 2016, 2017, 18, or 19 in their draft class, which is insanity.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah.
that whole thing is gone, and what we got left now is 2020 through 2023, which there's some great picks in there, and there's going to get some good guys to develop. It's just crazy that there's nobody left.
They
So,
have Ferraro, so let's not forget Ferraro, and they could have
oh
had
shoot, they have
Norris.
Ferraro.
They could have had Norris too.
Forgot
So
about Ferraro.
yeah,
They have
but
Ferraro, and then 2014 they have LeBanc still. I think those are the last two on those.
right, but yeah, I mean, I think when we look at sort of the decline of the Sharks, it is underrated. Just that, um, which led to, of course, Doug Wilson Jr. taking over in 2017 draft, and of course, started off great for him in terms of the actual
Sure.
players in Norris and Ferraro, but those guys are gone. And let's not forget too, obviously, 2015 was Timo Meyer, and he's
Yeah.
gone, but obviously he's a terrific player, terrific pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then we look at 2018, 19, and yes, the Sharks drafted late, but there is nothing from there, and that is tough. That's a tough look. Yeah,
Hmm.
I just wrote a story today actually, and it's something that we talked about. The
Hmm.
Anaheim Ducks. Just to close off my thoughts on all this. 2019, I think you look at the Ducks, and that's the first year that they were out of the playoffs. The Sharks, of course, were in the Western Conference Finals,
Sure.
and they had gone all in with Erik Karlsson too. The ninth overall pick, the Ducks draft Trevor Zegras. The 48th pick, which Sharks didn't have first round pick that year because I think it went in the Vander Kane trade. So speaking of going in all in too,
Hmm.
the Sharks' first pick in the 2019 draft was number 48, Artemi Knyazev, and so he hasn't quite popped. And if we go to 2020, obviously they're still paying for the Carlson trade. This and of course the number 3 overall pick that goes to Ottawa, not the Sharks.
Sure. Yeah. And there's still obviously the players from 2020 that are developing, but it's not like Bordelot and Gushin and Ozzy are up and with the Sharks right now contributing. So that's the other thing
Right,
to
right, right.
remember.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think right now, I think of course there's a lot of questions about Bordelot, and so it's probably between Gushin and Bordelot to make a larger NHL impact, but it's
Sure.
not necessarily looking like everyone like that's gonna be quite the draft that it was sort of promised to be. When the Sharks, everyone was really high on Weisblot, Bordelot, Robbins, Gushin, even Cole in the fourth round,
Sure.
and it hasn't
And
really.
Raska is gone.
And Raska made an early NHL debut, and so that hasn't quite
Mhm.
panned out. And in 2020, the Sharks, of course, don't get a draft Stutzla or anybody there at number 3, and the Ducks get Drysdale at number 6. And so again, it just of course they're playing the Ducks today, so of course reminded
Yeah.
of all that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of just shows that we're like 2 years behind where their rebuild is, I think.
Basically, yeah,
Yeah.
basically, and
2021 is like our first, like with Eklund is our first like real blue chip prospect out of this whole
in a
thing. And
long
then
time, yeah.
in a long time. And then 2022, you get some good depth there. And 2023,
And
another
they
blue
didn't
chip.
fully commit enough too, of course, because they
Hmm.
kept on Hurdle when there
Yeah.
was not really a good reason competitively to keep him, just because the team
Yep.
wasn't close at all.
Yeah. So anyway, now I'm sad again. I was happy this
Take
whole
off that
episode.
jersey. Take off that jersey.
Taking the jersey. No, no, I'm
Throw
happy.
it
The
on ice. Throw it on ice.
Sharks are they're making their way. It's just going to be a rough couple of years. So anyway, anything else to say about the Addison trade? I think it's again I think it's a good trade in terms of what the Sharks need. We'll see how well Addison can adapt in this kind of structure because he's going to get ran over defensively sometimes. So hopefully he's good on the power play to kind of balance all that out.
Right, right. And that's been a little bit rough the last couple games with him. That nothing has really, not too much has happened that exciting on that first unit. I think overall,
Hmm.
but it's a couple games, so we'll give. He
And
has he has a season.
he holds the blue line well. He
He
passes
does.
well on the power
He passes
play.
well. He does. Yeah.
So I think points will come from him, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
exactly what they need. They don't have anyone else who can really even
They
do
literally have
those
nobody
two
else.
things.
Yeah, so as we've
So
seen the first 12 games of the season. So yeah,
yeah.
it definitely is a clean slate,
Hmm.
a blank, not a LeBanc, a blank canvas for Addison, and hopefully he is a lot better than Ryan Merkley.
Yeah. Oh, LeBlanc canvas.
LeBlanc.
All right, let's get to the Craig Morgan interview, and we will see you guys next week. And again, if Eklund has a hat trick tonight, we'll put a little snippet in here of our faces just doing this. Yeah, yeah. I will screenshot myself buying an Eklund jersey to wear it for next week. That's the answer. All right, guys. Hope you guys have a good week. Bye.
I thought I had it bad covering a 0-10-1 start with the Sharks, but Craig Morgan, who's jumping on right here, he's covered two 11-game winless streaks to start the season with the Coyotes. Craig, now with PHNX Sports, has covered the Coyotes since 2000, and he's going to tell us what it's like to cover two starts from hell and how the Coyotes got through the season. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks for having me, guys. And that history of covering tough seasons goes back a bit farther. Obviously, the Coyotes have not had a lot of success in their history, but yeah, the last two seasons they stripped it bare. That was the plan, to acquire draft assets and try and build this from the ground up. So yeah, it was. We actually had a segment on our podcast called Pack Therapy, where fans could come in. We have a live show, post game show, and we could just talk through the issues and try and talk them down from wherever they were standing at the moment, because it was tough. It was tough hockey to watch for two seasons. But having said that, I always felt that's what the Coyotes needed to do all those years when they would say they were going into a rebuild and they would just change course midstream and, bring in guys like Taylor Hall and Phil Kessel when they were ready to compete. And it just blew up the plan and they were never able to build sustainable success. That is the buzz phrase around here with Bill Armstrong as the general manager, building sustainable success. So far, they have been able to stay on that plan that past regimes always abandoned.
Right. Well, then we'll talk about how these two sort of slow starts are connected, 2017-18 and 2021-22. And one kind of amazing thing about it is that the Sharks are the fourth team to start the season with losing the first 11 games. The Coyotes have two of those spots, and then before that's the 1943-44 Rangers. And so, actually, let me just ask you, just to start off, with both of these Coyotes teams, was there sort of that anticipation for that 12th game that, okay, this could be the record breaker right here?
Yeah, what's going back to that season? That was Rick Tockett's first season as coach. And they were threatening to go 0 for October. We were in Philadelphia for the last game, and the Coyotes had a 2-goal lead late in that game. And I was looking at then Coyotes website reporter Dave Vest. We had come down to the media room because we knew we had to make our way to the dressing room. They gave up 2 goals in the final 2 minutes of regulation, and we're looking at it like, is this really going to happen? They ended up winning the game in extra time, so they didn't go 0 for October, but it was absolutely agonizing watching that. Things haven't gotten a lot better around here, guys. As you know, there was the playoff bubble appearance, if you count that as a postseason appearance. But yeah, I don't know what your experience has been trying to cover this start, I don't even know what you're focusing on. If you're trying to put a positive spin on it for the future, really at that point, the Coyotes were they thought they had brought in pieces and they thought they were going to be better than that. So it was shocking to the system to watch that start.
Yeah, let's start there. What did people think of this team, the 2017-18 team that started off 0-10-1? But what did people think of this team to start the season?
Well, I don't know that anyone thought that they were a playoff team, but I think they had a little higher hopes that they could be competitive. Rick Tocchet was just coming in. He was much hype. They had at least some veteran players around where they thought they could be competitive on the ice. And clearly that start just buried them. There was no chance that they were coming back from that. They were literally eliminated from playoff contention in the first month of the season.
Yeah. Didn't they just acquire Derek Stepan, right? Hadn't been there for too long, right? I saw Goligoski. He scored I don't know what you would call it, the golden goal or the trash, the silver trash can goal against the Flyers to prevent the 12-game winning streak. Obviously, Ekman-Larsson was supposedly in his prime and thought to be Norris caliber defenseman back then. And so there were a lot of sort of names on this team.
Yeah, Antti Ranta, Nicholas Hjalmarsson, they had brought in a bunch of players, so they thought they were going to be competitive. Ranta couldn't stay healthy. That was one of the major issues. He was hurt all the time. So that really hurt them in goal. But beyond that, the parts just didn't mesh very quickly on that season's team.
What was the low of that losing streak? It looked like there was a lot of close ones to start the season. I see a lot of 1 goal, 2 goal games here. Unlike the Sharks, who of course lost 2 straight games in a row by a deficit of 17 goals.
Yeah, I don't know that there was a specific low point in that streak,
Mm,
but when you tie the record, I guess that's not a good feeling, especially for a first year coach. Rick Tocchet is an incredibly competitive person, and that was just eating away at him. He doesn't deal well. I will say this. I know Rick really well. He doesn't deal well with losing, and sometimes he takes it out on other people. And
mhm.
you definitely saw a little bit of that in the first month of the season.
Any stories you can share with that? Just
I'll
because
probably keep those to
I've
myself.
had that recently. I had to ask David Quinn about his job security, and I got snapped on a little. And David, I'm sure you know, is as
Yeah.
chill and as good a coach that you can have to deal with. But after almost 100 games and just 22 wins as a Sharks coach, eventually it got to him a little too.
Yeah, I think the main one was that he was unhappy with Oliver Ekman-Larsson. He really
Mhm.
expected Rick Tocchet has a specific idea in mind, an archetype for a leader. He wants a fiery guy who's going to get in and battle. That's not OEL's game at all.
Mm.
He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, but probably more of a pacifist. They just didn't mesh well at all. He wanted an elite game from OEL that OEL wasn't giving him. Oliver had really played well under Dave Tippett, who understood, I think, how to maybe, I hate to say it, but probably to coddle him a little bit to
Mm.
make him feel important. And he got the best out of OEL. Rick and OEL never meshed on that level. So they never had success together. And of course, we saw what happened to Oliver Ekman-Larsson's career from the time Tocchet came in. He fell off a cliff from
Mm.
being one of the elite defensemen of the NHL to just being a guy that they couldn't wait to get out of here because of that bloated contract that John Chaika signed him to.
Yeah. And there's a lot of relations with the Sharks that are sort of similarities there, obviously, with the Sharks with their bloated contracts and Mark Edward Vlasic right now, and it was Erik Karlsson the year before. But one thing
Yes,
you
good
notice
friend.
about this, what'd
Oh,
you say?
yes, good friend Erik Karlsson. Yes.
Oh yeah. And actually, I would say that that Eric was somebody that needed to be I, I don't want to say coddled, but he needed to be treated in a different way too. And David Quinn did treat him in that way and got 101 points out of him. And so want to mention that because that is relevant to the Erik Karlsson story in San Jose. But one thing I noticed though about what Rick managed to do and the Coyotes managed to kind of work their way out of this slump. They actually finished the season, if you can take out the first 11 games, they actually finished the season 500, 29, 31, and 11. So what kind of started working that you were able to at least get back to a competitive state?
I just think that they picked up his system. They picked up his style of play. They were a very aggressive team on the forecheck. That was one of the things. And they defended better. They got more stable goaltending once they got that situation solved. So there were a lot of factors that came together. I just think there was a feeling out period with Rick Tocchet, because he was so much of a different feeling coach than what they had with Dave Tippett. So
Mhm.
it just took all the pieces time to mesh. I don't know if that applies to the situation, because I guess I'd ask you guys that. I mean, what's the plan for the Sharks here? The Coyotes were trying to still build a playoff team at that point.
Right.
Have the Sharks fully embraced the idea of a rebuild? So they might be going in the opposite direction, is my point.
Yeah, I think it was kind of for a few years there, it wasn't really clear, and I think now the
Mhm.
last 2 seasons it's clear we're in a rebuild. It's just how much they want to mention that word. It's kind of like on the hush hush a little bit, but they are starting to say like, yes, this is a rebuild. So I think we're finally in that mode.
Yeah.
Just the first part is acceptance, as we all know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And I will give Bill Armstrong credit for that. He has been utterly transparent with that from day
Mm.
one. He has not hidden the fact that they are going to strip this down. They're going, as I mentioned earlier, acquire draft assets. They're going to do it the right way, and it's going to be some painful, lean years. He didn't hide that from the fan base at all.
Mm.
So I give the Coyotes credit for that. At least we'll see where it goes, obviously.
Yeah, this phrase was uttered by Mike Grier earlier this week in defense of sort of everything's going on, and he had a team meeting with the Sharks after they started off 0-10-1, and he said it's not about wins and losses. So there is a mission there from Mike. But I think if you look at the Sharks just in general, just like Keegan mentioned, uh, there was a lack of a mission to that by the end of the Doug Wilson era. They were trying to hang on to their
Mm.
guys and get what they could in terms of wins and try to get this team back in the playoffs with some recognizable names like Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson, etc. And so I think maybe the Sharks in the end of the Wilson era there, 2019-20 through 2021-22, all those teams missed the playoffs. That might resemble the 2017-18 Coyotes a little bit. And now we're in the okay, we are breaking it down. It's not about wins and losses. And so I think the Sharks today are closer to the 2021-22 Coyotes. But before we get to the 2021-22 Coyotes, though, did want to ask you just a couple more questions about this 2017-18 team. How well, first, actually, going back to how Talkett and the guys managed to get their way back to competitiveness, is there sort of one thing that you can take from that could apply to the Sharks, even though it's a different team? This isn't as veteran laden the Sharks group, I think, and there aren't as many expectations. But what is sort of one thing that maybe changed for Talkett and the guys in the second part of the season that maybe the Sharks can take from?
Well, it was just buy-in, and I'm not sure if the two situations are if you can compare them, because as you
Sure.
mentioned, that Coyotes team had a lot of veterans, and I think that's what really helped them turn the corner. You had a bunch of good leaders in that room
Mm,
buying into Rick Tockett's system and convincing the younger guys that this was the way to go, and that's how I think they turned it around. Again, that and some stability in goal after a full month, et cetera, or extra of poor goaltending and injuries. So I don't know if the two situations
mm.
are that comparable in that light.
Right. No, I see that Rantak had an amazing season. If he was healthy, he might have won a Vezina
Yeah,
with
I mean,
those
he had
numbers, right?
terrific numbers once he was healthy, but
Yeah, 930 save percentage.
honestly, that was an issue with him throughout his time here.
Sure.
They came to the point where they decided that he was not a goaltender who could be a number one in this league because he just didn't have the body composition to withstand the rigors of that many starts, that
Mm,
sort of workload. They really had to manage his workload. So he's better off in a backup role or a 1B role. And that's what led them eventually to go out and get Darcy Kemper, who of course turned into a really good goaltender while he was
mhm,
here. They remade him into a terrific
sure.
goaltender and traded him for a first round pick to Colorado. They won a cup with him.
How was you mentioned the room and how good it was, and this is always relevant, I think, in these situations. And so who were sort of the leaders of the room, the positive forces, and honestly, were there any negative forces kind of in the room, guys that maybe you might not want your young players around?
Oh, I don't know if there were any negative
Mhm.
guys per se in that room, but there were, like I mentioned, well, you mentioned Derek Stepan. He was certainly one of those guys. Nicholas Hjalmarsson, in terms of how you approach the NHL game, I mean, he is the model. He is. Everyone will tell you he is the consummate professional in his work habits. No nonsense. He's always there. He's always doing the right things on and off the ice. So he was a great example. Alex Goligoski was here. Jason Demers, former Shark, was here. I think he's doing some broadcast work for the Sharks
He
this
is,
season.
and for you guys too.
Yes, for us as well. Yeah. So they had a lot of guys like that in the room to help guide them, guys who had been
Mm,
through not just a lot of NHL games, but they had been through a lot of NHL playoff games. So they understood what it meant to succeed at the highest level of this league. And I think that really filtered down to the rest of the team.
mm. And you mentioned Jason. How was he in the room? And just if it was actually one of his last sort of full seasons, and I'm sure he didn't realize at the time, but but yeah.
He's a goofball. I don't know if how much you guys have talked to him, but
Oh yeah, a
Yeah.
lot.
He's been
yeah,
on the podcast as
it's
well.
his sense of humor, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
he was that guy in the room,
Mhm.
constantly chirping others. I remember doing interviews in the room, and I could not finish interviews sometimes because he was chirping the guy that I was interviewing, trying to disrupt the interview. That was Jason Demers. It was all in good fun,
Yeah.
and we're lucky enough to have him on our show, so he can do it with us.
Yeah, so that becomes a positive, right? Because in kind of times like this, 0, 10, and 1, and then you're trying to work your way out of it. And maybe you thought you were a playoff team at during training camp, and you're not going to make it. But you need somebody to keep the room light, right? Like not everybody has to be a stoic leader kind of guy.
No question. I mean, players need to know that it's not life and death, right? Yeah,
Right.
this is a bad stretch, and you're paid to win, and obviously it's awful to be in that situation, but the sun comes up the next day, and I think they helped the younger players understand that. One other guy that I should mention, who I talk to all the time and is actually scouting for Calgary now, is Brad Richardson. Talk
Mm,
about a no nonsense approach.
right.
One of the best quotes I've ever covered.
Hmm.
You never got you never got cliches with Brad Richardson. He
Mm.
always told you exactly what was on his mind, and he did the same thing in that room with the players.
Well, you probably haven't really dealt too much with Nico Sturm, but Nico actually reminds me a bit of Brad because both are Stanley Cup winners. Brad, obviously, with the Kings. Nico is no nonsense, does pretty much everything right on the ice, is always giving it his all, and never gives you a cliche for the answer. So you need that type in a room too, of course. Um, Wanted to ask you also about Anthony Duclair. Obviously, that's relevant to Sharks fans. And Duke started the season with the Coyotes, but was traded. And I get the sense that Duke was still trying to. This was still a rough part of his career. The Coyotes, he started off great for him when he joined them after the trade with the Rangers. He scored 20 goals his first year, but then after that it was kind of tough. Got sent down, and so it was a tough run in the end there for him.
Yeah, it was. There were a few issues here. If you get Coyotes leadership, some of the players to talk about what the issues were, some of it was work ethic. He was
Mhm.
not putting in the time. There were also there were times where he would make mind-boggling decisions with the puck on the ice. He would turn it over at the offensive blue line. He would try and go one-on-one with a guy when there's a line change and turn the
Yep.
puck over. You create that. So things like that. He hadn't honed his hockey sense at that point. Is I guess what I would say. That was a major criticism of here through multiple coaching staffs. So it
Mm.
wasn't just Rick Tocchet. It was Dave Tippett as well. They had issues with parts of his game that he didn't seem committed to working on. Obviously, he enjoyed some success a little later on once he left here, but those were issues with Duclair, who he could skate, you
Sure.
knew he could shoot and score, and he actually was. I thought he was underrated in wall battles because he had such a strong lower body. I doubt you guys have actually looked at Anthony Duclair's legs. I have myself, I'll admit that, but he
I
has got
have.
he has got a powerful lower body. So he was very effective when he would get into those wall battles, but they just didn't see enough of those other parts. They didn't see him progressing in those areas that they
Sure.
were really stressing. So at some point, it just became too frustrating. And as I mentioned with Rick Tocchet, he has very high expectations for players, and if he doesn't get buy-in from them very quickly, things are probably going to turn sour.
Mhm.
You moved your way into his doghouse, and it's really hard to get out of Rick Tocchet's doghouse once you're there.
And I think the Sharks has somebody maybe a little bit like that, though there isn't really any questions about his compete where maybe there were with Anthony Duclair back then. But I think Philip Zadina is maybe a little bit like that, where there's a clear bundle of tools. There's a speed, there's a shot, but doesn't all quite come together every game. But one another guy I wanted to ask you about. I think this is actually maybe the most important guy of this year that has lasted with the Coyotes, and it was his very first full year. Was how did this season shape Clayton Keller? He obviously his stats look good. He was third in the Calder, but just in general, just all the losing and. The Sharks fans are worried about a guy like William Eklund and how all this losing affects him. But how did Clayton take all this?
Yeah, I think he was so young that you do worry about it just becoming ingrained, it becoming a habit when
Mhm.
you lose for that long. So you worry about that sort of impact on a young player. But in terms of dissatisfaction, I didn't sense it at that point. He was just too young. He's trying to find his way in the
Mhm.
NHL, and honestly, after a really good rookie season, he fell off considerably for a
Mhm.
couple of years where
Yeah.
there were some of those same concerns about his defensive game. He just wasn't. He didn't have the details away from the puck. And it
Mhm.
was frustrating both to Dave Tippett and to Rick Tocchet that he wasn't picking those things
Mm.
up. The difference there is Taka has always described Clayton as a student of the game. He watches so much video. In fact, Taka said he would bug the hell out of him because he was always calling him or asking him questions about these things that he saw. He took up a lot of Rick Tockett's time, but he was willing to work with him because he was clearly dedicated to the craft.
Right.
You mentioned the impact of losing. I think it's important to fast forward to where they are right now this season.
Right.
Talking about Clayton Keller in particular, because when we got to this offseason, I'm not sure the plan was to beef up the Coyotes roster as much as they did this offseason, but Clayton Keller was a big part of that. More accurately, Clayton Keller's agent, Scott Bartlett. There comes a point where they're looking at the roster saying, okay, am I going to spend my entire prime of my career in a rebuild? And they raised concerns about that. You saw Jacob Chikrin wanted out after realizing they were going to be in this rebuild. Well, the same possibility may have existed with Clayton Keller if they didn't make a concerted effort to improve this roster this offseason. So while he was trying to adjust for those first few years of his career, he had reached a point this offseason, and especially after the terrific season he had last year, where he didn't want to sit spinning the wheels in a rebuild for another couple seasons. He wanted to see the Coyotes go out and make some moves to improve the roster. So that was his mindset this offseason. And obviously Bill Armstrong did some of those things by bringing guys like Jason Zucker, Matt Dumba, Alex Kerfoot, et cetera. And Logan Cooley came on board as well.
I mean, it speaks to Keller's growth, though, that at this point that he's sort of accrued enough credit, goodwill on the ice, off the ice, in organization that the organization will be like, okay, we will. We're not just going to laugh at this. We're not just going to let you go, but we're going to do what we can to kind of so you'll stay and you're good enough that we're going to kind of work with you here. But I guess with Clayton, though, that. Maybe hit this first year that you mentioned some of these defensive habits that weren't quite there, and he was working his way through too. But I guess you could pick up some bad habits, right? And maybe he did to some degree because the team just wasn't quite there around him.
I'm not sure if he picked up the bad habits or he simply didn't have them yet. I think there's a refinement that comes along with playing the NHL game. Sure. You can get away with things at lower levels. Certainly at BU where he was getting away with that. And he was a one and done and came in maybe a little too soon. The Coyotes have a bad history of this as well, rushing their prospects to the NHL instead of maybe giving them some time in the AHL to learn those finer points of the game. It's not an issue with Bill Armstrong. I will say that for the first time, it feels like they are committed to overbaking players in the AHL. But when Keller arrived, you could see that the skill level was there, but he didn't have a well-rounded 200-foot game at that point. It's something that he needed to learn in the NHL, which is not ideal because, as we've said a million times, the NHL is not a developmental league.
Well, you mentioned, though, with Clayton's career track, though, that we had that a terrific first season, was third in the Calder voting, but then dropped off a bit. But now, though, he's back as sort of your star winger, your franchise player to some degree. And so, what was it about Clayton that sort of allowed him to sort of survive those couple seasons in between when his game dropped off?
Oh, first of all, he's so competitive. He's one of the most competitive guys I've ever been around. So that certainly helped him. And when he hears criticism, he doesn't pout. It took him a while, again, to refine the game. And I think getting that 200-foot game, he's understood that, by playing better defense and having to defend less time, that means more time on offense, right? So it's going to give him more opportunities. But again, he was very competitive, so he worked at his craft. And that's what got him to this point, I think, is just a dedication to his craft and actually listening, being coachable, and trying to get to that next level.
Well, for Sharks fans, then with Eklund, at least Eklund, they have overbaked him, and he's not as productive as a Keller yet. Hopefully, he gets there, but his defensive game is pretty refined for a 21-year-old. But let's move on to the 2021-22 Coyotes here, and first question, echoing the one from before, what did people think of this team to start the season? And I could remember because I thought that a lot of people thought that this was going to be the worst team of the Cap era.
Yeah, I remember hearing that a lot. And I'll be honest, we wondered the same thing. When we looked at that roster, we thought it was going to be an agonizing season to cover, trying to find storylines, everything. I remember having a meeting with our staff and saying, okay, everything that we're going to write about this year is going to be forward looking, because there's not going to be anything on the ice worth writing about. And I mean, they weren't very good. They weren't as bad as they were supposed to be, because Bill Armstrong's great flaw is that he brings in really high character guys. And so the team ends up meshing very well and overachieving. The other, I don't know if it's a mistake, it might be a real help in the long run. He hired Andre Tourigny, who is in my opinion, a fantastic coach. And he has managed to connect with these players on a personal level that I really haven't seen. Dave Tippett was seen as a player's coach, but with Tourigny, it's different. I remember walking into the ice den for an informal workout that the Coyotes skate up there on their own before the season starts, before training camp starts. And Andre was there. Clayton Keller walked in the back door. As soon as he saw Andre, walks over to him and gives him just a giant hug. I'm like, I can't remember the last time I saw a player do that with a coach. It just speaks to the type of relationship that he's been able to build. And those two things that I just mentioned, I think made them overachieve a bit. But yeah, if you look at that team on paper, the roster, that was a god-awful team.
Just to remind people that this was the height of the Coyotes eating bad contracts, and so we have names. Sorry, this is sort of for Craig. This is like a horror show of names that I'm going to mention.
It's like
here.
a graveyard of
the on ice
LTIR.
Yeah, exactly. But we have, and I'm sure good guys who tried their best, but guys who are sort of at the back end of the career, obviously, like Louis Eriksson and Andrew Ladd and Jay Beagle, and down the line. So, wanted to ask you though about Tourigny a little bit here, and just after the Coyotes also started out here 0-10-1, and unlike the last Coyotes team we talked about, they were curb stomped quite a few times. They weren't nearly as close, and so this will remind you of the current Sharks, of course. And so, what did Tourigny do kind of to get their way out of this? Because actually, so after they start off 0-10-1, and people think that, well, is this Coyotes team going to win 10 games? I mean, I think those are serious conversations. That the low of the cap era is 48 points by the 2016-17 Avalanche. I'm sure there are people wondering if the Coyotes would even get to 30 points or something. And the Coyotes, though, this is a hot streak, relatively. From their 0-10-1 start up to around the trade deadline mid-March, they went 20-26-3, and then they dropped off at the end of the season. But what happened there to kind of turn this team into a surprisingly competitive team?
I think a couple things. First of all, just sticking with the process. You hear that a lot, but I think Andre really did convince them that, okay, they're going to be dark days here, but we are going to focus on the process, focus on the systems that I'm trying to instill, and you'll have some more success. But I think the biggest key there was, again, just like that other team, goaltending. They had Carter Hutton to start that season. And Carter Hutton, you mentioned guys at the back end of their contract. Bill Armstrong just told me like 2 weeks ago, I finally heard this story, that Carter Hutton told him before that season that he was going to retire at the end of the year. And Bill said, looking back on that, I probably should have said, uh-oh. How dialed in is this guy going to be? Well, we go to Columbus. We go to Columbus for the first game of the season.
Yeah.
And, I couldn't hear after that game because the cannon went off so many times in that building. They got blown out. And that's when everybody was like, uh-oh, this is going to be just historically bad hockey.
Right.
But Hutton got hurt pretty early in the season. They go out and get Scott Wedgwood, and suddenly, between Karel Vejmelka and Scott Wedgwood, they really stabilized the goaltending. They got pretty good goaltending, and that helped. Because as you guys know, when your goaltender is not stopping anything, it bleeds into the entire team. Confidence. Guys start doing things that they shouldn't be doing on the ice to try and compensate for that, and you can't play effective hockey. But when they got that stabilized, it bled out into the team. They played with a lot more confidence, and they had more success.
Yeah, well, parallels with the current Sharks. Mackenzie Blackwood has led the Sharks to 2 straight wins. I think he's made 80 saves in the last 2 games, something like that.
Feels like
Lots
150,
of good
something
Yeah,
like
stuff.
that.
exactly. And actually, the other point, the Sharks are 2-10-1. That other one point they have was a 51 save effort from McKenzie, and so Kaapo Kähkönen has been pretty decent to himself this year too. So both of them have been bright spots on this team. So that's a good a comp there with the goaltending. Was there ever a sense though during that losing streak to start the season, going back to that just a little bit, that just like, oh man, like just like again, same question. Was there a low in that point, and was there a sense at any point like, man, we like we're gonna be lucky to win 10 games?
Yeah, I never heard it expressly from the players, but I mean, low point like that Columbus game that I mentioned, it was just
Yeah.
like a shock, like, oh my God, we're going to be this bad. It's going to be really hard to watch this team. And I think if Carter Hutton had remained in goal, they might have been
Yeah.
historically bad. But yeah, that would be the low point. But I never heard it specifically from the players, but it was certainly talked around the rest of the organization. You heard those.
Sure.
And as I mentioned earlier, Bill Armstrong was transparent about that. I don't know if he expected them to be as bad as they were to start that season, but he knew they weren't going to be a very good team. That was on purpose. They constructed a bad roster to lose games, to try and lose as many games as possible and get the number 1 overall pick, which the Coyotes never get anyway. They've never had I blow people away when I tell them this fact. When you consider how little success the Coyotes have had, they have never had a top 2 pick in the NHL.
Oh, not even at number 2? Even the Sharks have managed number 2. Yeah, a couple
Not even
times
number
there.
2.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So a reminder too, like if you're trying to lose for the number one, if you're going after Macklin Celebrini, there's no guarantee that the lottery is going to work out your way, especially, if there's like a legacy team like the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Chicago Blackhawks also
Right.
in the draft lottery.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it.
Anything, but maybe I am.
Yeah. We'll talk about it in a little bit because it sounds like, they didn't get the number 1 overall pick, but they did end up with like Logan Cooley at number
Yes.
3, I think it was. So
Yeah.
the real gem of the draft apparently might have fallen to 3, but it seems like this year kind of the 2021-2022 is about getting little pieces out, right? Like get little pieces of your future roster of today's Coyotes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. Yeah. And Logan Cooley, you mentioned Logan Cooley. Like I talked to a lot of people before that draft who thought that he was the best player in the draft. Chris Peters among them, who had him rated number 1 all along. And now look, you can't judge these guys yet. We don't know what they're going to become. It's way too early to be rendering judgment on these players. But when you look at how much Juraj Slafkovsky is struggling with the Montreal, I mean, he was just here. The Canadians were here. And it was so clear that he does not belong in the NHL right now. He looks slow-footed. He had no confidence. He couldn't handle the puck. And then you watch what Logan Cooley can do, even though he's still finding his way in a lot of ways. You saw the goal in Australia, and you thought, "Oh wow, okay, they might have gotten the number 1 overall pick, even though they picked at number 3."
Yeah, yeah. Looking going back to this 21-22 team, we'll close up and then we will get to the draft, because that's of course the end goal of all of this for that high pick. But how was that room for 21-22 Coyotes? You said that Bill did put together a team of good guys though, and guys that were willing to buy in.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the names of the guys that they brought in. Antoine Roussel was another guy who's just a terrific dressing room guy. They've had. You look at this year's roster again; they have those type of guys, but like Patrick Nemeth, so many of those players were quality human beings, and I think it mattered. And they were trying. Another word that you hear far too often in the NHL is culture, but I think it is important to have those veterans around young players to show them how the game is supposed to be played. Sure. And more than that, how to approach the game off the ice, what you're doing with all of your habits away from the rink. Those guys are really important to instill that culture. So I'm actually forgetting your initial question, but those guys were really important in instilling that culture that they were trying to instill, and as was Andre Tourigny.
No, you answered it. Just was sort of about the room, and just a couple of individual players I wanted to ask you about. Shane Gostisbehere is a guy that sort of refound his game and value in Arizona, and so that's something that Mike Grier is trying to do too, picking up guys like Anthony Duclair, who scored just 2 goals last year, Philip Zadina, who was mutual termination with the Red Wings, guys like that. And so anyway, how did Gostisbehere just pick up his game in Arizona?
Well, first of all, opportunity. They gave him a chance to play in the role that he was accustomed to playing in Philadelphia before his minutes and his role were diminished there. He believed he had the game still. There are a lot of people that thought after that knee injury that he had lost that explosive first step that allowed him to do a lot of what he could do. He never believed that.
Mm-hmm.
Did rediscover his game here. Of course, they eventually traded him at the deadline to Carolina, and now you look at the start that he's off to now. It's pretty clear that Gostisbehere found his game again. The other thing that I would say is this coaching staff, that, again, it's that connection. Bear believed in him, and he gave him opportunity, kept putting him out there. And if you talk to Gostisbehere, it's funny, the outside perception of the Coyotes because of the arena stuff and the ownership issues. It's a clown show. It's an awful organization. But once you get inside hockey operations and you talk to the players about their experience, there are so many guys that will tell you they loved playing here because of Andre Tourigny, because of the way that hockey operations approach it, because of all the things that they've done, to beef up that player experience, whether it's the nutritionist they have, the chef they have. There are so many elements that Bill Armstrong has gotten right in hockey operations. So I think players actually have a very positive experience. This offseason, Nick Bjugstad and Troy Stecher come back because they both loved playing here.
Mm-hmm. And going with Tourigny too, the theme of sort of that coach that connects with his players. The Sharks could have that in David Quinn too. David Quinn has been a bit under fire, obviously, for the way the Sharks started, and also too his time in New York didn't quite end well either. But David is known as a player's coach. He's a guy that's going to have a lot of one-on-one time with his players, a lot of meetings and that sort of thing. And so he's going to build. It's possible for him to build these close relationships because that's the kind of coach that David Quinn is. And David does have a great relationship with a guy like Jack Eichel, who he coached in BU. Had what I understand, had lunch with him recently, just in the off season. A guy that he doesn't even coach anymore. And so that's a kind of if you're looking for parallels, maybe you see that with the Quinn and Tourigny.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned he's been under fire. How transparent were the Sharks with what this season was going to look like? Did they expect it to look as bad as it has looked thus far?
I think they were fairly transparent. They still don't like to use the word rebuild. I haven't heard Mike Grier say that actual word or President Jonathan Becker because they avoided that for years. At the end of the Doug era when the question was is it time for a rebuild?
Yeah, it
and
was
they would say words like
everything else. Yeah,
like
reset,
retool.
Did they know internally, though, from your conversation, did they know internally it was going to be bad?
They knew it was going to be bad. I don't think they knew it was going to be this bad. And that's what, when I say Quinn was under fire, it's not because the Sharks lost games. Everyone knew they were going to lose games this year. It's when you lose by you give up, you're the first team to score 65. Yeah, back-to-back games to give up 10 goals. And your goal differential is on pace to be the worst in league history, worse than the 1974-75 Capitals. So I think that if you can put it this way, I think that the Sharks probably thought that they would be closer to the 2017-18 Coyotes. And maybe not quite as good. I don't think they really thought they were going to make the playoffs, but instead that they end up closer to the 2021-22 Coyotes or the 1974-75 Capitals. And so I don't think they thought they were going to be this bad.
I guess the question is how much of a how much burden did they put on Quinn for winning, right? So that's kind of the elephant in the room is do they really expect Quinn to be winning with this roster? And it doesn't sound like because Grier came out a couple of days ago after the back-to-back horrible losses, kind of like in defense of Quinn in some ways, basically saying he hasn't considered a coaching change, and everything. So I don't think even Grier really kind of expected it to be this bad, but I also think they're giving Quinn quite a bit of leash.
Okay, yeah, I just wonder because you're right about being fairly competitive. You can't give up 10 goals in back-to-back games at any level, right? But you have to at least set expectations for the fan base so they're not. You set your coach up for failure if you're not honest with people and telling them it's going to be a rough season.
Yeah. I think the Sharks do have a little. I think they could be a little more transparent about that. I like what the Rangers did years ago. Just call it a rebuild. put a letter out to the fans. The Flyers did. Just let the fans know. The fans are intelligent. They can see the product on the ice, and the fans obviously. And you've been at SAP Center. Fans aren't going there even at the end of the last couple of years when they were still trying to hang on with the Brent Burns and those guys. Fans weren't going because they can see that the product on the ice just isn't very good. And so I think that they can be maybe a little more transparent, but I think though it is fairly clear. I don't think there were kind of false expectations that this team was going to make a surprise run for the playoffs. But wanted to ask you too actually about the defensive environment on the 21-22 Coyotes, because you had a guy there in a Moser who I think surprisingly played a few games, and it's tough though for a defenseman. I think though this kind of rebuilding environment, especially for defenseman forwards, you can kind of experiment, and if you get beat, well, you have a defense and you have a goaltending to bail you out. When you're on defense, you make a mistake, it's you and the goalie, and so that's a bit tough. And so anyway, can you just talk about that a little bit, because the Sharks have a couple guys that they've kept kind of down in the system, chiefly Shakir Mukhamadullin, who is their top defensive prospect, because the environment just isn't good for a guy like that.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. In most cases, I think you want to develop defensemen longer anyway. Their curve is generally a little longer than forwards when it comes to development anyway. JJ Moser is he's a unique case because, first of all, he was a little older when they got him up through the draft. He had passed through, but they were scouting him hard. They thought they were going to take him, and of course did in the second round. When he got to Tucson, they figured he was going to spend the entire season in Tucson, but they brought him up because of some injuries, and he impressed them so much with his mature game that he never went back. So you can have a player like that. Occasionally you have a guy who's ahead of the development curve, and JJ is one of those guys. But I agree with you by and large when you look at their prospects, and some of them are just too young to even be at this level. But they are baking a lot of those guys down in Tucson or leaving them, in whatever system they're in at this point. For the most part, their blue line has been veteran laden. They've tried to go with veterans to bring that stability. And again, like you said, not to throw those young kids into a really tough situation where they might lose confidence because the team is defending so much and they're probably getting beaten, making mistakes.
Yeah, and guys, if you're not familiar with Moser, it's a sort of interesting case. He was a 2021 draft pick, 2021 second round pick, and then pretty much immediately next season he's in the Coyotes lineup. And like Craig said, he's an older prospect. He was 21, but that still is kind of a remarkable leap. And you worry about how the bad play around him affects a defenseman like that. But you mentioned that JJ is sort of a special guy.
Yeah, he is a mature kid too.
Yeah.
They love him. You look at this blue line now, and he's without question one of their top two defensemen. I don't know that JJ Moser slots in as a top pair defenseman down the road. Ideally, he's probably a second pair guy.
Yeah.
But with the composition of the Coyotes right now, he's going to play up. But the other guy, I know we're getting a little in the weeds here, but they went out and acquired Sean Durzi this offseason, and he's probably been the most pleasant surprise because there was a lot of talk about his defensive game. And there's certainly work to be done there, but he's been a very effective player for them.
Yeah, and I think for the relevance for Sharks fans again is that you got to be kind of a special player to be that young and stick on the blue line like Moser has for the Coyotes. So yeah, that was an interesting guy to ask you about. And finally, I want to ask you about Vejmelka, and I think that that's one of the things that Sharks fans maybe or early in the season, of course, but if the Sharks have found any solution in net, then that can make a lot of this losing worth it, because the Sharks obviously haven't had a stable goaltending really in the last 5-6 years or so. And so if Mackenzie Blackwood is your answer and he's only 27, maybe he's your long-term answer. And so I want to ask you about Vejmelka, just in the sense that if anything came out of that season, Vejmelka's emergence, and this is a guy that could be sort of our guy when we are competitive again, like you guys, like the Coyotes are right now. That's sort of a huge win right there.
Yeah, it's a complex answer. I'll be honest with you. So allow me a little latitude here.
Yeah.
First of all, Vejmelka, they thought was going to be in the AHL that season. The plan was to have Carter Hutton and Josef Kozenac as the backup. And
oh, sure. Former Shark, famously.
yes, and Vejmelka so badly outplayed Kozenac in camp that there was no way they were going to do it. So they sent Kozenac down. Vejmelka was there. And then, of course, Carter Hutton struggles and he gets hurt. And suddenly Vejmelka is your starting goaltender. And he played very well that season. He's a guy, of course, who was drafted originally by Nashville, went back to play in Europe because he didn't want to play in the minor leagues where Nashville wanted him. He thought he could develop better in Czech. And he sort of got forgotten about, but they had been scouting him. The Coyotes had been scouting him and signed him and brought him over. It was a bunch of their scouts that came together. Brian DeCord was with the organization back then. They have a scout in Central Europe named Teal Fowler, who's becoming a bit of a legend because he keeps uncovering these gems. So they brought him over. He earns the starting job and really plays well. And he played well the past couple seasons. So yeah, you can look at that and say, okay, they signed him to an extension. Maybe this guy is the future. First off, be wary with goaltenders. How many of them actually sustain over that length of time?
Sure.
There's not many if you start going through it. So to expect Vejmelka to be the guy when they emerge from the rebuild and are a playoff team, I don't know. He's only signed for 2 more years. The other side of that is they claimed Connor Ingram off waivers. They really thought he was a guy who was ready to take the next step. Kevin Woodley, I don't know if you guys follow him within Goal Magazine, banging this drum with me for a very long time. If they're going to go get anyone, go get Connor Ingram. Well, they did. And you can make an argument now that Connor Ingram is a better goaltender than Karel Vejmelka. There are a lot of people internally who believe that now. They just re-signed Connor Ingram. He's signed for a year longer than Vejmelka. So how this all plays out, we'll see. Karel Vejmelka could end up being a trade chip at some point.
Right.
I mean, I know there's a team in Edmonton that's probably looking for a goaltender. I don't know what's going to play out here, but I'm always leery of predicting the future of goaltending because the landscape shifts so often, and so few guys are able to sustain that sort of success over a long period of time.
Vejmelka,
now the Coyotes, sorry, one more thing. They have a lot of prospects now. They just drafted 3 guys this year, so they're flooding their pipeline with guys. Michael Robbo is their top prospect now that they lost both to Colorado. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah, the Karel Vejmelka, like on Twitter and everything, is basically just his high danger save percentages is like amongst the top in the league over the past couple of seasons. And I wonder if that's just from like being put in those kind of positions. But you're right. A team like Edmonton, who probably is giving up a lot of high danger chances right now, might be able to find use
Blackwood
for
with
him.
the Sharks too.
Yeah, kind of like Blackwood. Yeah, this put in these positions where they're forced to be the number one, and some of the shots might not be. If everything was as good as their high danger save percentage, then they would have 950 save percentage, but they don't. But either way, I think it's an interesting thing that he came out of that season for the Coyotes.
Yeah, it was a great story because of you consider where he was. He was forgotten back in Europe. He didn't even know if he was ever going to get back to the NHL, if he's ever going to be granted an opportunity. But then he comes over and what transpired early in that season is just insane. From a guy that's supposed to be the starter in the AHL to a guy 1 month into the season that's the starter in the NHL and has made a bit of a name for himself. People are aware of Karel Vejmelka. They're still not aware enough of some other Coyotes. JJ Mosier's a guy that's probably just flying completely under the radar, but is a very good defenseman. And I'm going to bang this drum again. Matias Maccelli somehow finished 4th behind Stuart Skinner in last year's Calder Trophy voting, which is absolutely criminal when you compare their 2 seasons.
I actually voted Skinner in the top 3, so
okay, I'm criticizing you.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Well, we could have a brief discussion about this. I'm just curious. Skinner was the number 1 goalie. Granted, it was a pretty good team in front of him, but he managed to help the Oilers. Obviously, Campbell struggled last year too, and so why are you anti-Stewart, Craig?
I'm not so much anti-Stewart as I am that he had a slightly above average season when you looked inside the numbers. He just got a lot of wins, and that's what I kept hearing from people. He got a lot of wins. Well, yeah, his team was scoring a lot of goals. So he's got Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on his team. He wasn't that great last season. He was, like I said, slightly above average. Matias Maccelli led the all NHL rookies in points per game. If he hadn't gotten hurt for those 18 games, I still wonder if he would have been in the top 3. I thought he deserved to be there anyway. And then when you look at the trajectories of those 2 players this season,
that's fair.
Maccelli has been even better, and Stuart Skinner has been abjectly horrible.
I would say, yeah, in my defense, though, yeah, those 18 games gone are definitely mean a lot to me. Just for example, if Cale Makar had been healthy last season, I think Cale missed about 18, 20 games too. I might have picked him over Erik Karlsson, no matter how many points Erik scored, because Cale would have probably ended up in the 90s, of like pretty close, maybe not quite 100, but with better defensive play and whatnot. And so that does, in my defense.
Yeah.
I think you get a little bit of a disadvantage when you play like a smaller market like Arizona and everything.
True.
If you miss time on top of it, even though watching Michelli this season, you're right. He's a special player. It's tough to get the votes from everybody.
Yeah, definitely the market matters. I remember when he made all rookie team last season, I tweeted it out with a story, and I literally got a serious response from a bunch of people who are not in this market saying, who? Like, I hadn't even heard of Matias Michelli somehow, which just blows my mind. That's fine for fans. For voters, I expect a higher standard.
Rude. Last time you were on the show, Craig.
I think you also knew who he was, at least, Sheng.
Yes, I didn't know who he was.
Sheng and I actually talked about this. Sheng had his argument. I'm just razzing him. There are people that had arguments for not in the 18 games is certainly the most prevalent among those. If he had played those games, he probably would have been. He might have won the scoring title. Who knows?
And hey, Edmonton obviously is a very tough market to goaltend in. So even if you do above average, I mean, it's a market where if you have 2 bad games in a row, they want to ship you off to Bakersfield. So, and they did that with Jack Campbell basically. So,
well, he's had 2 bad seasons.
2 bad seasons. That's fair.
Well,
that's fair.
Maybe
that's
1.5.
But. Actually, I did want to ask you. This is a little aside, but you mentioned Theo Fowler, and I didn't really know Theo Fowler, but his name is spelled, by the way, guys, Teal, and so I don't know why he's not working for the Sharks. The Sharks should definitely snag him. But anyway, what are some of Teal's finds?
JJ Mosier was another one, actually. Yeah. So when you look at any player that comes from those Central European nations, whether it's Germany, like Maximilian Zuber, Julian Lutz, those are 2 prospects that he scouted primarily. So anybody who comes from Germany, Czechia, Slovakia, Switzerland, that's going to be Teal's area of expertise.
Oh, wow. Okay. So he's a European amateur scout, and okay. Yeah,
he's got the Central European nations. He lives in Heidelberg. I actually saw him this summer because I was in Heidelberg and had dinner with him. A fascinating guy who coached Adler Mannheim for a long time, won championships. So he's got a fascinating background, but he knows that area. He has so many contacts, and some guys, I don't know what it is, because I think it's probably the hardest job in the NHL. I have no idea how you project 17 and 18-year-old kids as NHL players. I just don't know how they do it. And you see the success rate, it's low. This guy just has a knack for spotting talent. He just has it. Whatever it is, he's got it.
What is your opinion? What is a high success rate for a scout? I imagine it's like being a major league hitter. Like if you hit 300, then you hit 3 out of 10, then you're doing great.
Well, it's hard to know because there's so many scouts and everybody has input in those meetings. And
right, yeah.
Well, in the Coyotes case, you might get 11 or 12 guys in a draft because they have so much draft capital. But how many of your guys are actually going to make it onto the board? But you'll always hear like scouting directors say, if you get 2 players out of a draft, that was a good draft, which is crazy.
2 out of the 7, basically.
Yeah, it's nuts, right?
That's about 300. Thereabouts, baseball, but anyway, Theo Fowler. So this is also, I didn't know he was German too. So Hasselplattner.
He's American. He's American.
Oh, he's American? Okay.
He ended up going over there to play, and then met his future wife and fell in love with Germany, and he just stayed. And actually, having visited Heidelberg for the first time, I understand why he stayed, because it's a phenomenal place.
Nonetheless, Hasselplattner, German owner of the Sharks, the guy's right in your backyard. This is a guy to reel in. I mean, come on, Theo Fowler. Are you kidding? Just to wrap up with this 2021-22 team, before we kind of get to finish off with some sort of Sharks relevant points, any other positives or negatives from this season that you wanted to share, that things that maybe the Sharks can learn or pick up from?
Positives. They got out of Glendale. Can I say that?
They got out of the season finish. Yes, you can say that.
They left Glendale, which was which was the original sin for this franchise. I'll put it that way. That everything that you've heard about the Coyotes' struggles in this market goes back to that decision to move west to Glendale. Richard Burke, the guy who owned the team at the time when they came from Winnipeg, he had a partner, Steve Ellman, who wanted to move the team to Glendale because they offered him a sweetheart deal. They were still in negotiations to build an arena in Scottsdale, but that had hit some snags. Ellman wanted to jump to the west side. Burke said, it's never going to work out there. You don't have the fan base. You don't have the wealth base. You don't have the corporate base. You're not going to have success out there. So if you want to do it, you need to buy me out. Ellman did. They moved the team west in 2003. And it's been an odyssey ever since. And now, of course, they're still trying to get an arena built. So I know that's not the answer you were expecting, but I got to go there because I want to get it out there to as many people as possible to understand the situation here in Arizona, why they have struggled for 2 decades. It all goes back to that. I often wonder if they had just stayed with the Scottsdale plan, built it there, if Richard Burke still owned the team, not the parade of owners that we've seen come in since, how much different this franchise would look. But they needed to get out of Glendale at some point. They realized it. Playing at Mullet Arena is not the solution, obviously, but they need to be on the east side of town because this is where the population base, the wealth base, the corporate base of the city is. It all makes sense, the areas where they're looking to build an arena.
Right, and for fans who aren't aware, Glendale is, what is it, like 40 minutes, 30 minutes west of downtown? Is that about right?
It all depends on traffic.
Right.
I have been on that freeway for 2 hours thinking I
Okay.
should packed water because it's just so painful to drive out there sometimes. Yeah, it all depends on traffic, but it's again, it's people didn't go. They didn't
Right.
go.
The point is just it's too
You guys get
far
this
out
because you
there.
live in a Western city. People don't in the
Yeah.
East don't understand how people behave in Western cities. They're not going to do that. They're just not going to go that far for a game. It's too much of a hassle. There
I
are
will
too many
say
options.
the Arizona Cardinals play out in Glendale, next to where Jobbing, Gila River, wherever the Coyotes used to play out there in Glendale. But that's the NFL though. That's a different thing. So
Yeah, and
when
it's
you're the
Sunday. Right?
NHL, yeah, also Sunday,
Sunday,
great
so no
point. Yeah.
traffic.
Yeah. But if you're the NHL, it does make sense. You got to centralize. I mean, they have the same problem in Ottawa, where the Senators have played for years in Canada, which is a good 30 minutes away from downtown. And Canada is a very pleasant place. Huh?
Sunrise is the other
Oh,
great.
right. That's another good example too, right? And so you really do hurt your teams. I mean, if you're the owners, you get nice deals, you make money maybe from it. The city pays you to be out there, but it hurts the team long run for sure. And I guess since we have you on here, so Craig, everyone's always asking about the Coyotes arena situation. So where are we at this moment, November 10th at 10 a.m.?
Oh boy.
Well, you probably know already that they announced that they had a letter of intent on one site in Northwest Mesa. After the Tempe vote failed, they started looking at other areas, and this site is actually only about 4 miles from the Tempe site, so still in a great area for them. But then beyond that, they're about to announce sometime this month, I think, or at the very latest, early December, they're going to announce another site. I think it's going to be in Phoenix, on the east side of Phoenix. Those are probably going to be the 2 finalists that they're considering for where to build an arena. And then you've probably heard Gary Bettman say it, and he's told me it multiple times. The All-Star break is the date that they're targeting for announcing concrete plans on where they're going to build this arena. Now, they still have to close the deal, right? There's still a lot of complications. It's not like this is a simple thing to get an arena built in a market, but that's the timeline right now. We'll see if they get it done.
Yeah, and I'll be honest myself, like seeing this from a distance. I mean, I had to compare that there are markets out there that don't have teams that would immediately support a team that comes there. But I recognize what you're saying, Craig, that in a lot of ways, the Glendale being there out there for 2 decades, that there was maybe never a fair chance to see what the Coyotes could do with a successful team and to be in downtown Phoenix. And so I am hoping that can happen. We can see for all, NHL has bent over backwards, it seems, to keep the Coyotes there, and so hopefully they end up right, because it is a huge market there.
Yeah, it really is. And when you look at the growth of hockey here, you look at USA Hockey numbers. Youth
Fair
hockey has
point.
grown
Yeah.
exponentially here. It's
Mhm.
always one of the top five states for growth, and obviously you're starting with smaller numbers, so that factors into it. But growth here has been immense. I just wrote a story because the rivalry series between Canada and the U.S. for women's hockey opened its series here. They played at Mullet Arena the other night. Girls hockey is blown up in Arizona. And then you look at the fact that Arizona State University has a Division I
Mhm.
program. It's crazy to see what's happened in this market. I do believe that if they're in the right area, they can succeed. You have to win in these markets. You have to
Sure.
win.
Yeah.
I do believe that there is a possibility forward if they can get this arena done in the right part of town. They just haven't had that advantage. And then when you look at all the struggles, when you're not making money from the arena, and the NHL is more arena dependent for its revenue than any other league,
Sure.
when you're not making that revenue, it filters down to everything else that you can do. It impacted the way that the scouting staff that the Coyotes could hire, the development staff that they could hire, the players that they could spend upon. And when you don't have the scouting staff, you're making mistakes in the draft. And you can go through the Coyotes draft history and say, whoa, there was enormous mistakes made because they didn't have the resources to devote to it. So
Mm.
it filters down to everything. It all starts with the arena and ownership.
At least this year, it seems the Coyotes are a more competitive team because, or at least than I've watched in the past couple of years. And just because the Sharks have been so bad, I've been catching a few Coyotes games just to kind of
Watch
cleanse my
some good
palate,
hockey.
watch some decent hockey. So I
Oh,
guess talk a
let's
little
clip
bit.
that spot right there. Okay. Can I just clip
Uh,
that? You've been watching Coyotes games instead of your own team. I don't hear that
yeah.
much.
Well, I mean, they're
Thank
like
Logan
our.
Cooley.
Yeah, Logan Cooley is kind of done. I think I have Karel Vejmelka in one of my fantasy leagues. A couple of reasons, but but anyway, so I guess I'd speak a little bit about that and that kind of importance for the season because they are in Mullet Arena to just kind of maintain a little bit of that momentum, I guess, going forward as they need a new arena soon.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I mentioned the pressure from Clayton Keller and maybe others. Like Nick Schmaltz was on the market last year, but the reason they didn't move him was probably because of Clayton Keller. If they
Mm.
traded Nick Schmaltz, Clayton Keller probably would ask for a trade too. So
Mm.
understanding those dynamics and how it impacts what they did in the offseason is really important. They beefed it up because they had to keep their core satisfied. But the other half of it is you have to give your fan base some hope. You can't just say, "Hey,
Right.
we're going to be doing this for 5 years, and oh, by the way, we're playing at a 4,600 seat college arena." Those are tough optics. So yeah, you're more competitive. You're giving people a reason to come back to come watch the games. I don't know if have you been to Mullet, Sheng?
I have been. Yeah, actually, I was going to say that it's an absolutely fantastic experience.
Yeah,
If you're an NHL fan, you should. It's not going to be often that you're going to see, and all the jokes are warranted. I mean, it's a college arena. I mean,
yeah.
you're on a college campus. I mean, what else can you say about that? But to see an NHL game in a 5,000, 4,000 seat arena, I mean, it's like watching like Bruce Springsteen in a 4,000. That's a great, just a great intimacy. Great seat. The student section is fantastic. So yeah, it's a definitely something that every fan should do. Wow, they're still at Mullet.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so I think they've given their fan base enough carrots to keep stringing them along that hopefully we're going to get out of this. Obviously, the arena is a massive piece, and I have no idea what happens if it falls through. We can talk about that if you want. I mean, I've been hearing, oh, the Coyotes are going to this city or this city for 15 years.
Yeah.
I've read the national reports. They're definitely going here. So I take all of that with a grain of salt because I know how much they're committed to this market. And I've been told that there are other local ownership options if this group can't get it done. So we'll see how all that plays out. But I think that they've strung them along well enough by making this team more competitive, by giving
Sure.
a fun environment there. And then I think the fan base has always been very realistic. They've had their eyes wide open to what this was going to be, thanks to Bill Armstrong. And they see the moves that he's making, even though the Coyotes haven't landed the top one or the top two picks in the draft. They have a lot of interesting prospects. Their pipeline looks good. They have 13 draft picks in the first two rounds over the next three drafts. So they're going to accumulate a lot more great assets. They like what's happening in hockey operations. So there's hope for the future here, again, provided they can get the arena built.
Well, let's get to the draft a little bit, and I think that the 2018 Coyotes and how they drafted and the 2022 Coyotes and how they drafted are very instructive in terms of you can do all you can to quote unquote tank or get that high pick, but you got to stick the pick. And the 2018 Coyotes, number 5, they drafted Hayton, and Zadina went number 6. And of course, both teams missed out. Hayton's a good player, but both teams missed out on Quinn Hughes, of course. And but the 2022 Coyotes, we talked about Logan Cooley. And so that's a pick that appears that the Coyotes really did stick right there. And so anyway, just can you talk about the 2018 a little bit and sort of the decision to get Hayton to pass on Hughes?
It's interesting. You remember there, one of the Kachuk boys was there, but went right before Barrett Hayton. I had heard that even if Kachuk had been on the board, the Coyotes were still going to take Barrett Hayton. Can you imagine the optics of that in Arizona of all places?
Yeah. Wow.
John Schreikel was really sold on Barrett Hayton. He really loved his game, and Barrett Hayton's not a number 1 center. I'll just come out and say it. He's playing number 1 center right now because they don't have better options between Nick Schmaltz and Clayton Keller. Mm-hmm. I think he can be a top 9 center, and I think he can be a really effective one because a lot of the pieces of his game away from the puck are good, but he hasn't produced consistently. He had that run near the end, the second half of last season, where he's producing. Well, he's struggling to produce points again this season. So you can certainly go back and question that. And listen, every GM has that on their resume where, I should pick this guy instead of that guy. That's goes back to what we were talking about earlier, projecting 17 and 18-year-old kids. Quinn Hughes is having right now, he's probably the leader for the Norris Trophy. He's been absurd with how good he's been. We'll see if the Vancouver Canucks can sustain that. But yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. That was something that kind of stuck out to me watching that team this year. It was just that Hayton doesn't seem like, he kind of seems like the third wheel of that line. He does a lot of like net front work, and he definitely like tries to do that repeatedly, but I think that's kind of it. He just gets to the front of the net and stays there. And obviously that's like where a lot of players make their money, but it doesn't seem like he matches the skill level of Schmaltz and Keller.
He's got to finish, right? He can't finish. The net front is important in creating space for them, especially with the way Keller and Schmaltz like to operate high in the zone with all the motion. It works well. He's drawing the defense down. And another thing that Barrett Hayton does that goes completely unnoticed, that is critical to offensive zone time possession, whether it's on the power play or 5-on-5, is he's great at puck retrievals. He'll win battles and get pucks back. So that's a critical piece for this line as well. But if you're playing first line center, you better be producing points, and he's not. So they hope that happens at some point soon. But we're getting to the point in Barrett Hayton's career where you say, all right, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe that's not who he is. Maybe he's better served as a number 3 center in this lineup. I'm not even convinced Logan Cooley's a number 1 center, by the way. We'll see how that plays out. But if you can slot Barrett Hayton in at number 3, you're probably still happy if you've got Cooley, Hayton, and Jack McBain, but you're still missing that guy maybe at the top.
Yeah.
You'll need another top 6 center to really believe that you can be anything more than just a playoff team.
Right. Well, Craig, really appreciate your time here. I don't know if you have any other sort of, I guess, lessons or things that the Sharks can take from these Coyote teams. I think we've kind of run the gamut of, you got to stick your draft picks. You got to do well with sort of the guys like the Gostebear, the sort of the reclamation projects that you take in. And if you can figure out your goaltending, then that's a huge win. But you got anything else there for us?
Yeah, I don't know what the Sharks' plan is. I haven't studied it, but yeah, acquiring draft capital obviously is a key to a rebuild, and acquiring a lot of it. The Coyotes have gotten really creative with some of those things. I mean, they've given up nothing for players in some instances. They literally gave Philadelphia nothing for Shane Gostisbehere, not the player, and got a 2nd-round draft pick. So if you can swing deals like that, if you can be as creative and successful as Bill Armstrong, that's going to help jumpstart the rebuild greatly. For you guys personally, I recommend that you implement something like our pack therapy to help you get through the next few seasons. And if your outlet's okay with it, maybe you want to drink on air as well to help you get through it.
Yeah, we had we do subscriber mailbags from time to time. So our subscriber mailbag we had after the Sharks before their win. So that when the Sharks were 0-10-1, everybody's job security questions from about everybody. The AHL coach, David Quinn, Mike Grier, the president of the Sharks, who's more in business, Jonathan Becker, even the owner is also going to sell the team. And then my favorite one, actually, you'll appreciate this one, Craig, was will all this be a perfect storm to blow the Sharks out of San Jose? So even a relocation question.
There you go. Wow. You guys are really in it now. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You're living in my world now. That's hard to do.
Yeah,
what's your drink of choice? What's your drink of choice then? In these times,
at PHNX, we actually have a partnership with a fantastic local brewery in Tempe, which you should visit if you come to another game, called Four Peaks. So they provide us with beer. We are actually allowed to drink this beer on the air, and we have done so at times because it's really good beer.
Free beer too. Oh my, yeah.
Sheng, I don't know what we're doing here. You know,
you gotta get free. That's all we need is free beer. We don't need. We just need a sponsorship that pays us some free beer.
Nothing.
And
we don't need money. We just need beer because this season's going to be very long for the Sharks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your time, Craig. This was very enlightening, and it's good to see the Coyotes going back to some winning ways this year for sure.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. I do believe that they're on, as far as hockey operations, they're on the right path. This is, I should have said it before, but I've obviously covered this team for a very long time. From a hockey operations standpoint, from top to bottom, from management to scouting to development, this is the most locked in I've ever seen this hockey operations department. This is the most complete hockey ops department they've ever had.
I mean, it's not like there haven't been successful Coyotes teams. I mean, there was conference finals teams, right? So,
yeah.
Well, anytime you have a guy named Teal Fowler on your staff, you're built for success, right?
You can't have him. You can't have him.
And players like Liam O'Brien, like, gee, he's just so much fun to watch. Like watching him yesterday was just, he's chasing down a Blues player trying to fight him for
Just the hair and the beard alone are enough for me with Liam O'Brien. But then when you talk to him, he's just a fascinating guy. So yeah, it's fun to cover him.
Thanks so much, Craig.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.